like to call the Radnor Township School District Tuesday, June 18th special board meeting to session, to order, and we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Welcome, everyone. I'd like to report that we had executive session. I don't know that we have had executive session since our last business meeting, so I'll report on executive sessions at the June 25th meeting, because I don't think we've had any. And then we'll start with public comment. Is there anyone for public comment? Do we have any public comment by email, Patty? Okay, great. Then let's move right into our priority discussion action item, which is an adoption of the general fund budget for the fiscal year 1920. And I will entertain a motion that the board approve the general fund budget resolution in its entirety for fiscal year 1920 with total budget revenues of $99,893,512 and total budget expenditures of $100,986,944, utilizing $545,741 of Act 1 exceptions, $800,000 of committed fund balance for employer retirement rate stabilization, and $293,432 of unassigned fund balance, requiring a real estate tax levy of 24.9181 mils for each $1,000 of assessed valuation, which represents a 0.7314 mil increase, or 3.02%, in the local real estate tax millage over 2018-19 levels. May I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. And a second?
Second.
Thank you. So with that, we can now open it. Michelle, do you have a presentation you'd like to begin for us?
I do.
Thank you.
The 2019-20 final budget that is presented to you this evening for approval is the same basically that we talked about the previous month. It maintains all of our current programs. It also includes the new technology initiative that was presented back during a curriculum committee previously. And it includes 2 contracted mental health professionals that we're going to be paying for through Access. If you recall, if you were here last month, Mrs. Lesage gave a small presentation about that, answered some questions. So as Mrs. Stern just read, the projected revenues are just over 99 million, projected expenditures just over 101 million, with a shortfall of 1.9. That was the preliminary budget that was approved back in January. When you approved that, you gave us permission to apply for Act 1 exceptions, which we did. Those totaled $1.76 million. So since we did the preliminary budget back in January, we've made numbers of changes, which we went over at our previous meeting. I won't read those all to you, but you can look at them there. Here's some more additional changes. And what we're proposing is utilizing $445,741 in Act 1 exceptions, $800,000 of retirement escrow, which we didn't use in the 18-19 school year, which we anticipated using, and $293,434 of fund balance. Having said that, that includes a tax increase of 0.714 mils for a total millage rate of 24.9181, or 3.2%. So what that means to a home value of $274,000 is an additional $200 in real estate tax. If your home value is $472,000, that's an additional increase of $345 in real estate taxes. And if your assessed value is $700,000, it's $512 in additional real estate tax dollars. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, so, you know, I know we had a long meeting and discussion about this in May, but in case there are any continued questions, I'll entertain them.
Yeah, I wasn't here in May, but I have looked through the book, and I guess my understanding of the discussion in May was they were projections, which makes sense, right? We're back in May, we still had almost 2 months worth of income and expenditures. So in looking at this book and purely at the book, I have definitely several questions, and I guess would like to have some understanding on a few critical things. First and foremost, if I look at the book and I look at this year, under revenue, I look at the budgeted revenue for this year was 97.3 million, plus some change, if you call hundreds of thousands of dollars change. And our June 14 year-to-date, so there's 2 weeks left in the school year, is at 91.6 million for a under income of 5.7 million. So first I want to understand that.
So that is only through June 14th, and that's based on a cash basis, accruals, doesn't have any accruals in it. So over the course of the next couple of weeks through the end of June, and then for the following 60 days, we will post revenues back to the 18-19 school year if they were really associated with the 18-19 school year. So for example, in the summer, we'll get payments for delinquent real estate taxes, transfer taxes, all of that will get posted back July's that we receive and August. And then we've got some large state receivables that we haven't received yet that we get the last 2 weeks of June.
So do we have a list then, if this is where we are year to date, what is our projected revenue with all of that stuff added in?
I don't have that number with me
Okay.
currently.
So I would like to see that as a comprehensive list.
Sure.
Because of 5.7, I get that, I understand the movement, and it's obviously following all the standard accounting codes and all that stuff, which I have no doubt on. But a 5.7, I've never seen it where we've had a $5.7 million delta 2 weeks before the end of the calendar year. So maybe it's because we've had projections in the past.
It probably is because you've had projections, and so this budget does not include the projection on this report, but where the revenue is at 614 is very consistent with where it's been in the past
Okay.
at this time of the year.
So I guess so I'll just make this kind of a generalized statement. There are a few things missing from this book that I thought we had standardized on in our policy and our practices. And a projections column was one of them. So without that information, though obviously a verbal input makes sense, but without that information, it feels a little disingenuous to vote on the budget, for me, anyway. I don't know about anybody else. Equally then, when we go to the expenditures summary page, on page 5 of 5 there, the 2018-19 budgeted expenditures were $98.1 million. And right now, as of June 14th, and again, maybe there's some things to be added, we're at $85.4 million. That's a $12.7 million gap, which I guess is good news if we've got a shortfall on revenue. But why such a big gap on that? And can we see that summary?
Wait, where are you again?
Page 5 under, so see here, it was 98 million is the
Right.
budget,
Right, correct,
and here is the expenditures through June 14th.
right.
It's a $12.7 million delta. And again, without a projections column, so what are the kinds of things that are
So
not showing?
again, this is cash basis as of when it was run, which was June 11th, I believe, is when the
Okay.
reports were run. And what that does not include, it does not include all the expenses that we are going to be paying through the end of the year. Does not include all the expenses that we're going to be paying over the summer. A lot of our special ed expenses really take until September, October in order to get here. And it doesn't include our third quarter and fourth quarter PSERS payment, which are considerably large, about $1.4 million each time. And it doesn't include any of the salaries that we're going to be paying our teachers for the months of July and August and their accrued benefits on top of that.
Okay.
So that is what's going to make up that shortfall. When
So-
I did my projections, I was estimating that we would have about $1 million of surplus.
Yeah, because I saw that later in that summary where it looked like it was 1.5 million, at least. That's the other thing I wanted to clarify in the summary. It looked like you were projecting a $1.5 million surplus.
Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, generally overall, this is my last budget, hurrah. I really thought that we had included those things in the budget. I highly recommend that you guys add back in a projection column. I respect and understand that our current accounting system makes that difficult. It's not the easiest tool, or at least my last round on the finance committee as chair, it wasn't an easy tool. But I think we need to have that information on a $100 million budget. We should have that. And if the projection can't be, easily incorporated right into the spreadsheet so we can see the breakdown, just even an Excel spreadsheet for each page would have been helpful. It's alarming to me to see those numbers.
Michelle, was that a change for this final budget? Because I actually thought I thought even as recently as a few months ago, we had projection columns.
I do a projection, and as Patty said, it's not something that's easy to do on our accounting system because
Okay.
it doesn't allow you to do a projection in the system. It's done manually. This year, the budget process, we had quite a few new administrators who were working on the budget, and so it was a little bit more difficult to do that, so it didn't get incorporated into the accounting system like it normally would have.
But we'll get that back in.
We'll get it back in.
Okay,
Absolutely.
great, thank you.
Yeah, or as a minimum, I think for our board packet, I'd at least like to have the summary that Michelle just went through, just in a simple Excel spreadsheet. Don't worry about aligning it with each individual GL account or alignment. Okay, next few questions. It's not really a page number. So in the front section, under budget overview, there's a page about summary of changes committed and unassigned general fund balance. So this was something, again, that we kind of tried to add to a standard package, so that the board members could see whether our fund balances were going up or down at kind of a gross highest level, and/or, where we had targeted commitments, which they stay then, I guess, in general fund 10. So again, here on this page, it's a good historic view in terms of where we've been. And as of June 30th, what the anticipated balance is, meaning things that some of them are reserved for future spending, which I get. But what it doesn't show me is the 2019 incremental. And so I was struggling because I went back to, for example, the technology section. I went back to technology to see where that budget was. And I can't tell, looking at that, if I can see what we're doing for the 2019-20 budget per se in terms of what's being requested, but I can't tell what the budget growth is the fund balance growth will end up being. So for example, under Fund 15, which is the technology fund, under the third tab from the back of your books, it shows the 18-19 budget for all technology at $1.62 million. It shows year-to-date expenditures of $881 million. It's $737,000, quote-unquote, underspent. Again, I am sure this is probably where some of those adjustments come in that make up that $12 million from earlier. But I can't tell with the $17.9 million that we want to have in that budget.
You mean the 1.7?
Sorry, thank you. The $1.7 million that are in the 19-20 budget. I can't tell if by adding the $1.7 million, is that fund balance really growing?
The fund balance in both the technology fund and the curriculum fund grows in some years, and then it actually has a deficit in other years. So about 3 years ago, we changed the way we budgeted for that fund, because what we used to do is we used to take into account whatever fund balance was there and reduce the amount that we were transferring over based on the estimated amount that was in the fund balance.
To hold a balance, just
To
kind
hold
of
the
a running
balance kind of like flat.
Stable.
So the thought was always that these funds would zero out at the end of the fiscal year. And what we found is that there was really big fluctuations in technology and curriculum, especially when you were purchasing a new curriculum series that was expensive, like science or math. And so, and health is really expensive too. It's something you wouldn't necessarily think was really expensive, but it's also expensive curriculum to replace. So what we wanted to do is we wanted to get rid of those ebbs and flows and transfer the exact same dollar amount over to those two funds every fiscal year, so that we could build up a surplus, so when we were replacing an expensive curriculum or having a large amount of money going out for something like the new technology initiative, we could still transfer the exact same amount of money. So if you have the detail report, which we did not provide to you because it's hundreds of pages, but we're happy to if you would like it. You just need to request it. And you look at what was transferred over the past couple of years to curriculum and technology, you'll see that we're transferring the exact same amount. So with the exception of technology, because we had a reduction, we were able to reduce it 200,000 this year because of getting rid of some of those technology devices.
Mhm.
So
do we have then, got you, makes sense, I follow you. But again, without kind of the projection, we can't really see what we expect the fund balance to
So-
increase or not get spent. How much won't get spent that was planned in 2018-19, which in essence would increase the fund balance.
So that's something we do behind the scenes as administrators. I work with Dr. McQuiggan and Dr. Robarchak, and I also work with Byron McCook, Dr. McCook, to look at what their budget projection is for 5 years out and then make adjustments.
Okay.
So it's something that we could provide. We've not provided it in the past, but it is something that we're currently doing, and it would be easy enough to include in the budget book going forward.
Okay. I mean, again, I think you should. We do it for capital, right? We've been doing it for capital for years and years.
We do it for capital.
And now that these numbers are as big as they are in these repositories, these fund balances are kind of there for history, you know, forever now. I think we should understand what the incremental is
So
going to be.
We do something similar for capital. It's not exactly the same because for capital, we're not budgeting the exact same dollar amount every year. And some districts do that, but it's a
Understand.
similar
Yeah,
process.
Yeah, we underfund our capital and hope to make it up when we have surplus that we move stuff over. I got you. But, so that even more so tells me that these two fund balances have the potential of growing. And I again, encourage you guys staying on this board that you should monitor that. I fully understand the lumpiness of it all, and, but if you aren't following that piece of it, then we can get a little bit out of whack and/or you can come up short. So do you know with the curriculum or with the technology, what do you expect ballpark? If we're $734,000 delta on technology, in the end, with a projection, what do you think the ending fund balance increase will be?
I think they'll be similar to where they were at the end of June 2018.
Okay.
I don't anticipate them having a large amount of growth. I think they'll have a slight amount of growth, but I don't expect it to be significant.
So we have another, roughly another $700,000 worth of expenditures for technology to come in between now and the end of the year?
We'll have quite a few expenditures. I know that Dr. McCook has purchased some items that haven't come in yet, and he's been working on finalizing his budget
Okay.
for this current year.
Curriculum
18-19.
was $225,000, so I mean that, and I certainly understand the ebb and flow. And I well imagine there's more curriculum stuff to come in before the end
There
of this
most
year.
definitely
Yeah.
is, because they've been doing some in-service training with teachers at the end of May, and then again at the end of June as we approach the end of the school year.
Okay.
Michelle, hang, let me just, the curriculum, the textbooks that were reviewed tonight in curriculum, will they come out of that fund? Or will that come out of a different fund? So we approved, I don't know, probably over $100,000 at least tonight of, you guys reviewed in curriculum, and we'll approve at the board meeting. Is that coming out of that curriculum fund or a different fund?
It will come out of the curriculum fund.
Okay.
In terms of which fiscal year it comes out of, it'll depend on when the purchase order gets written and when
Right.
the books are going to be received and/or where it was budgeted. So I'll have to talk with Maureen to see when she budgeted for that.
Right.
If she budgeted in this fiscal year, it may possibly come out of this fiscal year, but I think it's more likely that it'll come out of 1920.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I think you already answered my other question with regards to the estimated fund balance, or the estimated, whether we were going to have a surplus or a deficit, and it looks like a 1.5 roughly ballpark
Roughly, yes.
for fund balance. And I'm assuming then that's why the recommendation is plus to stay within the 8% on Fund 10, the next action on the agenda is for us to approve a $500,000 transfer to capital.
Correct.
Okay. So I would like to also suggest, I mean, unless you guys have some specifics, and maybe you do from the facilities meeting, what that $500,000 is tagged for. I know we have some pretty big things that you guys have been talking about, but are they earmarked? Are these surpluses earmarked for something specific?
They are. If you go to the capital reserve tab, and you go to the very back behind the ProSoft reports, you'll see a report that has yellow on it, and it's got a summary on the front with all the different buildings listed, and it shows the 1819 anticipated, and then 1920. You can see for 1920, we have $3.9 million worth of projects identified. Some of that is for the athletic improvements, setting money aside for the athletic improvements up at Radnor High School. That likely will be moved around to some other location, but if you turn to page 9 of that capital improvement report, you can see that with the summary, 1920 budget requests are the $3.9 million. We've got 1.6, almost 1.65 that's remaining. That's going to offset the cost. And then some other projects that had been completed with funds remaining. So we need $979,000 to complete the projects that are earmarked. So $500,000 is going to be coming, and then we're doing a transfer for the difference between the 500 and the 979.
So why not, okay, got you. So why not just, if we think it's 1.5 million, why not just transfer the whole 979 or, $1 million and keep the transfers together?
You could do that. You're going to have, based on my estimates, you're going to have a $1.5 million surplus. So administration thought it made sense to transfer that $500,000 now, as opposed to moving it into a fund balance account and then transferring it in the next fiscal year.
Right, I'm with you on that, but why not transfer $1 million instead of 500,000? If the shortfall is $979 or $980,000, why not just transfer the whole amount
You could do that.
as one single?
You could definitely do that, and
transaction.
that would be easy to modify that resolution to transfer the $1 million.
And at least then, by doing that, you're, transparently targeting where that dollars are being spent. And by using this report, you know why. Okay, but for clarity too, and I guess, Mike, this is really more a question for you, because I think we're still working our way through whatever the facilities improvements are at Radnor High School. So this is mostly about funds to build up a placeholder to pay for some of that. Is that correct?
Yeah, we've been doing that for a couple of years now, right?
Yeah, for the bleacher situation, we
Yeah,
did.
for the whole, yeah.
So that
It's
is
the
what
same.
that's intended for?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so, I guess, maybe that's all my questions. Hold on. I think that's all my questions. No, so I guess my one other question, albeit at a very highest of levels then, with that fund balance growth between the technology and with the curriculum between those two funds, are there any targeted items for technology or curriculum that we know that surplus is needed for next year? Back to that idea that it's lumpy from year to year. Do we have anything already earmarked?
Not that I'm aware of specifically. I would have to reach out to Dr. Rabarchak and McQuiggan and Dr. McCook to go over that one more time with them. Sometimes you go over it so many times you don't always remember what's in there. There's a lot of numbers in the budget.
Some of it is because we referenced it, some of it's the technology initiative that we voted on in March. I mean, we're gonna be purchasing the Surface Goes for the kids.
Right, but that's built into the budget, right?
That is built into the budget, and if you recall, when Dr. McCook came to the curriculum committee meeting and gave a presentation, he actually showed that purchasing those Surface Goes was going to result in a reduction.
Right.
So that's not something that the surplus would be used for. I know that we've been doing some cabling and we've been doing some firewall replacements and things like that. And Dr. McCook would have a better idea than myself about what all of those things are that it would be purchasing.
So the things that are delineated, as we approve the budget this evening, anything that's delineated here in the budget on the line items, we're approving the spending of those items in that amount. So things that are going to be spent on, with the quote-unquote surplus in that Fund 15, are those have to come back to the board for approval?
They don't actually have to come back to the board for approval. So the way Fund 15 and Fund 17 work is a little bit different than Fund 10. In Fund 10, if you have something that we call a non-budgeted expenditure, you have to come back to the board and you have to ask for permission. In Fund 15 and Fund 17, you would actually just overspend your expense account. And if you look at those funds, what we're transferring over to those accounts, Fund 15 and Fund 17, and what they're spending less than what we're transferring. So that tells me that they're not planning on using any of the surplus next year. If they were planning on using the surplus, what you'd see is maybe a transfer for $1.4 million and expenses of, say, 1.8,
Yeah, just like you do with the capital.
just like you do with capital.
Yeah. So again, I guess between the two of them, I'm sure it won't be that amount, but between the two of them right now, it's a net $1 million. It'll be less than that somewhere along the way, but again, I highly encourage that gets monitored and/or agreed upon how those extra funds are going to be spent at some point. It'd be my personal recommendation. Especially since we're increasing, or the proposal this evening is to continue to increase taxes above the Act 1. So if we're gonna, I guess my fundamental concern is we end up with fund balance growth both at 10, at general 10, at 15, and in the curriculum special accounts, and yet we're taxing people over the Act 1. It bothers me, as you all know. It's not a new message for me. Anyway, so I think that answers my questions. And I would like to request that we go back and add projections to the budget, even if it's on an individual sheet, that we add both on revenue and on expenditures, and that we highlight what we think we're going to use with the fund balance on those two smaller accounts. Thank you.
Okay, do we have other questions tonight? Sarah, Andrew, do either of you have questions? Okay,
I have a question.
sure.
So,
I don't, sorry.
All right.
I was on mute, and I know Andrew had to step off for a second.
Okay,
forgive me, this is not my favorite topic. When we met last month about this, we talked about option A, option B, option C. Option A, I believe, is in this presentation here, it's the preliminary budget, I believe that was that. The increase was for 2.3% tax increase to make up the shortfall. And now I'm looking at the final budget, and I'm seeing that projected revenues have gone up since this preliminary, and our expenditures have gone down, and we're using retirement escrow and using committed fund balance. So why would our tax increase go up to 3.02?
So the 2.3 tax increase that you're referencing, that was the maximum amount allowed by the Act 1 index. So when you approve that preliminary budget, you have to show need in order to apply for exceptions. So your revenues are always going to be less than your expenditures in order for you to be able to show need.
Right.
If they're not, then you wouldn't be able to apply for the exceptions. So when we applied for the exceptions, we got $1.176 million, I believe, in exceptions. Most of those were related to special education expenses that the district had paid the prior two fiscal years. So what they do when they look at that exception is they look at what you spent in 16-17 on special ed and what you spent in 17-18. And we had a significant increase. And then they calculate the Act 1 exception based on that. So when your expenses go down and your revenues go up, you just shorten the amount of the gap. So the original gap was just under $2 million. And so as we use some of those other pieces of revenue, the additional revenue generated by the Act 1 increase increase, and we had some changes in terms of staffing that we identified. That's where the changes come into place.
I don't think I asked the right question. I'll try again. So we looked at option 1, which was to increase the taxes enough to cover the shortfall. Option 2, which covered the shortfall plus a little bit. And option 3, which was to raise the tax as much as possible. And this board, the majority voted for option B, which is what we have here tonight. Is that correct?
This is option B, correct?
Which is cover the shortfall and then pad it a little bit.
So it doesn't actually, let me go back to this one slide, Julia. It doesn't actually cover the shortfall. So if we look at this slide, the way that we're covering the shortfall is we're using $545,000 worth of exceptions down at the bottom. We're using the retirement escrow, and we're using committed fund balance. So when you look at the revenues versus the expenses, you can still see that our expenses are higher than our revenues. So technically, the way you're covering your shortfall is by using your fund balance. If you didn't want to use any of the fund balance, you could have used all of the exceptions, and that would have eliminated some of those things.
But I'm sorry, may I?
Please, because I'm
Sorry. Yeah, no, it's okay. But the use of the $800,000 for the use of the retirement escrow, as you well know, when you got here, we had started that back when I joined this board in 2007 with a rather hefty increase in taxes to help build that retirement escrow, knowing that our PSERS obligation was going to be going up quite significantly. And so we did the right thing, and we built a fund balance. A lot of school districts didn't have the forethought to do that, and we got some good recommendations, and we did. And I think we've managed it quite well and quite transparently. We can see here in a chart, right, that we've been spending it down as planned, maybe even less than we originally planned, right, because the money seems to be endless. It's almost like a bottomless pit, because by now I would have thought we would have been out of it. So I'm kind of pleased that there's still almost $2 million that's left even after this use, correct?
Correct.
Which is a shock and surprise, and again, another cushion, if you will, or another place where we've got some funding if we need it in an emergency. But that $800,000, while I agree with you, that is spending fund balance, it's spending intentionally the fund balance we had put there on purpose and pre-taxed people for the purpose of being able to fund it. So I got you on that. I got your understanding of where you were going with that. I don't mean to imply anything else. The committed fund balance, my understanding of that is basically funds that we had previously said, like we're going to this evening, move $500,000 over to a fund balance location, and it's going to stay earmarked.
So
is it really use of fund balance, or is it intentional use of funds that we put there?
So I have to apologize. There's an error on this slide.
Okay.
It should say use of unassigned fund balance.
Unassigned.
It should say unassigned,
Okay.
and I apologize for that.
Okay. So that actually, with that change, that is use of fund balance.
Correct.
And that actually is going to come out of the 1.5 million surplus, or it helps to fund some of that, right?
Yes.
Gotcha. All right. Did you
Julia,
get that?
Julia, let me show you a different way.
Uh-huh.
Let me try it slightly differently. If you go back to, Michelle, to the page where it showed the initial shortfall of the 1.9 million. So, Julia, to your point, back in January when we did this, the shortfall of 1.9 came as a result of we were only using the 2.3% increase, so that is part of the projected revenues of 99 to 275,000. Since that time, we have increased our projected revenues by about 623,000. So you could so the shortfall, if we did nothing different, and Michelle increased her projected revenues by $623,263. And she reduced our expenditures by just a little over $200,000 to $207,000. So you could take the shortfall and you could subtract from that shortfall the $623,000, which is the difference of the revenues she projected back in January and the revenues she projected last month. And if you took the projected expenditures, which at this point were 101 million, but a few months later, they're down by 200,000, so they're just a little over 900,000. That brings you to a shortfall of, I just had the number on my phone, but basically just over $1 million. And that $1 million, Michelle, if you could fast forward to the page where you show the 800,000 of PSERS, nope, back page. The shortfall was just down, go back one page. The shortfall is now down to $1,093,432. So the shortfall got closed by four things happening. She found a little bit more revenue. She reduced some expenditures. We're using committed escrow, and we are using unassigned fund balance. And that's how we closed the gap. We had a gap of almost 2 million, and so so one of the ways that we closed the gap, to your point, which is what you said a few minutes ago, one of the ways we closed the gap was by coming up with the middle-of-the-road use of half of the exceptions. Had we stuck at the 2.3%, which was index, we'd be looking at another line here, or extra money here, where we'd have to say, well, how are we going to close that $545,000 gap? We would either have to use more unassigned fund balance, or more retirement escrow, or Michelle would have had to have found another $545,000 in expenditures to reduce. I mean, it had to have come from somewhere. So that's how it closed.
May I? The one place it could have come from, I agree with you, Susan, I followed your logic there. The one place it could have come from is the projected $1.5 million surplus.
Which, at the end of the day, is still use
But it's
of
a
unassigned.
surplus off of, it is.
Yeah, no, it's a use
unassigned.
of unassigned fund balance.
So
That's
if
why I
we-
said that.
I got you. So I just want to be sure that it's clear.
But
that
we
it's-
can't actually use, technically though, and we did talk about this at last month's meeting, we can't actually technically use that, the projected
It's not audited yet.
budget surplus until after 60 days, 90 days, Michelle? I can't remember.
You can't.
You can't allocate it.
Actually allocate it to Fund 10. You can allocate it to Fund 15, you can allocate it to
So you
Fund
could use it to spend the other
17, you
things.
can allocate it to Fund 32. But you can't allocate your Fund 10 assigned fund balance to the current.
Fund 10.
To Fund 10.
Because Fund 10 can't be over the 8.8, or the 8%.
Well, not only that, but we can't even allocate, we couldn't have had a line here that said use of the 18-19 budget surplus to fund 19-20, because, I mean, it's all money, it's fungible. You and I both know that, but you can't assign it that way because we have to wait for 60 days, 90 days.
You have to wait till October 1.
Thank you, October 1st, to earmark or allocate
First
this
90
year's, whatever this year's budget surplus is to the budget.
Except this evening, we're going to talk about transferring fund balance to get to the 8% of at least the 500,000.
but over to-
And then you'll have to do another step later, or the million.
You'll
if we need that to
reallocate your
Right.
fund balance at a later point when
Yeah.
the audit is nearly complete.
After October
Using the
1st.
projected surplus to fund Fund 15 or fund the curriculum fund or something else. We could, if we chose to do that, we could.
We could.
We could.
If people are fundamentally against using something that's up there.
We could, but we'd probably end up having to do another transfer anyway, of a smaller amount to make up for whatever the actual audit it is versus what we did
yeah,
on a
I agree.
projected basis, so you might as well just wait till the audit comes in.
Susan,
Yeah, sure.
Michelle, I appreciate your, that was a question I had, on this page that says use of committed fund balance, that it's actually use of unassigned fund balance. And correspondingly, on the page where you have the fund balance summary, the 293,000 is deducted from capital committed for capital projects, as opposed to the line that says unassigned. Can you-
Correct. I can,
Just in case this is a book that lives on, am I right and that needs to be corrected too? Or is that? So if you go to the page in the general overview section, the budget overview, and the page that has horizontally the summary of changes.
It should be down
The
and
293
undersigned.
is coming out of the capital projects line as opposed to the unassigned line. So if it could be reissued correctly, since we might hold on to these or wherever, if it's even posted, I don't know
It
how
is
that works.
posted on the website, so I
So-
can make that correction very easily, and we can repost that page.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that
Okay,
out.
thank you.
Okay, do we have other questions? I don't know if Andrew was able to join us. Sarah, are you good? I know she has her phone on mute. All right,
Yes, I'm fine. I've had my questions answered at prior meetings. Thanks.
okay, great.
Is
And-
there, I have one more quick
Sure.
question, more so for you than I think for Michelle and other, maybe not. So this evening, we're having a special meeting. It's a week before the deadline according to our own calendar.
Right.
Do we have, given a 12 million and a $7 million amount of information not shown here that we've only verbalized, is there any reason we can't wait to vote on this for next week and get the meaningful information so that the projections are clear and that you all know what you're voting on?
Well, I mean, I know what I'm voting on, and I heard Michelle's answer about projections. So, and
Okay.
that column is missing
Is there a
from-
reason that we can't wait till next week when the
So-
other people on the phone are here and?
Yeah, this was
We
a
get the
conversation
data.
No,
that,
I think we had to vote this week because we have to get the tax bills out. Michelle can answer that, but that's why we're having a special meeting, is there is emergency to the timing.
But the deadline is,
That's the deadline to pass your budget.
right,
That's the deadline to pass your budget per the public school code.
Right.
But you're also required to send your real estate tax bills out to your taxpayers on July 1st. So
so we
doing
had-
the budget on the.
Give you more time to
To
do
give us more time, because those bills all have to be stuffed and printed
I got
and,
you.
and sent out to taxpayers. And even doing it today is really cutting it pretty close for us to get them out next week.
Patty,
And the last
and I
2 years.
respect that, I'm
yeah,
just bothered by the fact that there's huge numbers that are not in this book.
The last 2 years, we've tried to shoot for a May approval of the budget. Based on some of the discussions over the last 2 months, we wanted to give a little extra time, and then that started to run up against the deadline to try to get the tax bills out. So that was the rationale for the
And
meeting
if
tonight.
Jackie starts shaking behind me, someone give her a cold rag for
we
her
did, I
husband.
mean, Patty, we did talk about the, kind of the revised timeline at finance a few months ago. No, I knew that, I knew that.
And I'm totally in for it, but the binder is insufficient right now, other than verbal discussion here. So that's an issue for me. So I'm gonna have to vote no, because it's just entirely too much money that's not accounted for in our written document.
Okay. Okay. Andrew, just before we, there we go, so Andrew's back. So do you have any questions for Michelle? I don't know if you were able to, if you have any additional questions from last month.
No.
Okay.
And, reviewed the documents. They seem pretty much in line with what we had talked about last time, so no.
Okay, alrighty. I don't know if there's any further discussion to be had. Chuck, do you have any questions? Amy? Okay.
I do.
Okay,
So, the county reassessment, what is that's supposed to come through and affect us, next year?
Next year.
I mean, it's gonna be litigated out.
2021. 2021.
So, on the millage increase history, you have here, the last time the county did this in 2001 budget year, it shows no millage increase, no percent millage increase, so when that runs through, are we not allowed to do an increase that year?
It's supposed to be revenue neutral, so you would not be able to do a millage increase in 2021.
So our expenditures are gonna go up contractually, because of all the 7 labor groups we have, so our labor costs are gonna go up, the healthcare costs are gonna go up way more than whatever they went up this year, which was kind of a fluke how little they went up this year. But, so our expenditures are gonna go up in the state, and the county's telling us we can't increase the revenue to that point because of the reassessment. Well, it's supposed to be.
But you'll get a revenue increase anyhow when they do the reassessment.
Well,
maybe.
no,
It's
you're supposed to
it's be
calculate it so that it's revenue neutral. So if you look at that millage increase history, Mr. Miller, you'll notice that was before Act One was in place.
Right.
So my assumption is they're gonna do the same thing as they did previous, but they could change that because of Act One being implemented. I don't know, do you have anything you wanna add to that?
The only thing I'd add is that
Why you wore the tie today.
when counties do countywide reassessments, the net result of the reassessment is supposed to be revenue neutral, so that nobody ends up getting a windfall or taking a loss as a result of the reassessment. So what'll happen is they'll reassess, then you'll have to recalculate whatever the mills are to make sure that everything, the same amount of money you're getting from the reassessed values that you got before, you get afterward. And then you move forward from that point in time. It's just it's them resetting the line so that there's not a windfall that anybody gets as a result of the reassessment.
Right, so if the reassessment stays neutral, and in the Act One environment, we would we would not get an Act One allocation?
The way that the reassessment works is separate and apart from the normal raising of taxes, the
Right.
yearly raising of taxes. So the reassessment would come into play, and then everything would have to be readjusted to that level, and then you would move forward from there as far as looking at the tax increases from that
So
point
you
in
would
time.
expect that we would get some sort of a levied Act One allowance in that same year?
Yeah, it's my understanding that you'd still get the same index, you'd still be
Right.
able to
And whether we
utilize the
use it
same
or not, or
index.
whatever?
Right, it's
Okay.
just that when the reassessment takes place, you don't get extra money as a result of
Just
that.
because yeah.
Right.
Okay.
So when you say it's revenue neutral, you mean revenue neutral per township or per school district, not per county?
Yeah, well, it's supposed to be revenue neutral
be
across
both?
the board to everybody that's subject to the reassess. So the county's supposedly not supposed to get any additional money just because they did a reassessment. Neither is any of the constituent municipalities within the county supposed to get any additional money just because they did the reassessment. It's just supposed to readjust the value so that everybody every property is being fairly valued versus what their actual fair market value is. Because as it is right now, when's the last time it was on, 2001?
Yeah.
2000, okay. So what'll happen is you'll have properties that were reassessed in 2000. And in 2000, the property values were considerably lower than what they are right now. So you might have a house on a street that was reassessed in 2000, and right next to it, a brand-new house was built last year that's getting assessed at a much higher rate because they're being taxed at the current fair market value for when that house was constructed. So you have two houses which could be, for all practical purposes, nearly identical as far as what their actual fair market value is, one paying substantially less in taxes than the other, simply because of the fact that the other one was there at the time of the reassessment and the new one was constructed since. The idea of this is to eliminate those disparities and make it even across the board for everybody. But they don't want you to utilize this to say, oh, this is an opportunity now to generate more revenue. It's not supposed to do that. It's just supposed to level out those disparities.
So then we
Once-
adjust our millage rate so that going forward, whatever increase we have is based on that new normal.
Based on the new base,
The new
right,
normal.
Right.
But the idea of an Act One increase has not been eliminated,
The-
as
the rea-
separate and above from this
Yeah, the reassessment
assessment.
doesn't change what the school code says about,
Okay. Yeah, because we didn't
taxes.
have Act One back then.
Isn't it easier to think of it in terms of individual assessments for a home, that it's the total value across the county would stay the same? That's what they're looking, I mean, the word revenue was like kind of throwing me off. It's really sort of
Yeah,
capitalized market value stays the same.
Right.
After a reassessment to what it was previously. It's just that what goes into that capital market is that House A is now worth this and House B is worth that.
Yeah, I mean, on an individual basis, individual property owners, there will definitely be winners and losers in the reassessment on an individual property by property basis. But overall, the total assessed value is supposed to result in no additional revenues.
But school districts will have the ability to still, whatever the index is going to be set at that year.
Yeah,
To look at their
That's
normal
what I was
budgetary
actually
process.
asking.
That's
I
what-
mean,
yeah,
I
to-
understand all the other stuff about the reassessment. I didn't mean to bring all of, drag you all through that explanation because I know, I mean.
Your concern is
knowing
we
all
won't
that,
be able to.
My concern was because based on the past history, it was were they gonna say like, tough luck, your expenditures are going up, but your revenues this year are
Well,
flat.
But you can't increase your budget.
hang on, Mike, because there's a
you
more
still-
relevant,
Well,
piece of
that- I mean,
information that
was
you brought up to
really
me.
Not, well, I just didn't want, I just wanted to make sure that, if we're not taking exceptions now for the special ed expenditures we've already had, that we're not gonna get caught short on our reassessment year.
No, I know that, and, after last month's meeting, you mentioned something to me, and I asked Michelle, or I asked Ken to follow up about it, and I just, we talk a lot about the Act One index, and, the intention from the state was to kind of make it fair how taxes are raised, but in fact, and we have the millage history from the Act One index, so initially, when it started, it was in the 3s and 4s, the Act One index, and then the economic downturn occurred back in 2008, 2009, and you can see from the Act One index that it went down pretty low in the beginning of the economic index. But what was not really widely publicized to most school districts is that in 2012, 2013, PDE changed the way that they calculate the Act One index. And they moved from a calculation that was basically a year average of the statewide weekly wage, half the statewide weekly wage, and half of the increase to the employee cost index. And they changed the way that they calculated that onto a 3-year average. And the change was intended to slow down the growth of the index. So in fact, if you look at the attached spreadsheet, after the economic downturn, in the late 2010 era, the rate at which the Act One index goes up is much lower and slower than it was when Act One was initially proposed. Now, the whole point of the Act One index was to, try to slow the growth of taxes. I understand the reasons. But they made what was a tough playing field for school districts to, pay people a decent and fair wage, pay for, healthcare and things like that that rise far above the index, more difficult. And so it does beg the question that when you have the opportunities to take some exception dollars for expenses you've already realized, in Mike's case, and then in this case, he mentioned the special ed expenses that we've already incurred from a couple of years ago, should we be taking those opportunities? Some, a little bit, we really debated that very vigorously last month, and had 3 different options before us, and ultimately our first vote, which turns out a valid vote, and our last vote, where we landed on the middle, is maybe where the 9 of us found a compromise. And, as we often say in compromise, when everybody's not exactly happy, that's probably the sign of a good compromise. And, that was a lot of work last month that we did. We talked about philosophy and our beliefs and, trying to find a way to make sure that we are preparing the next boards and the next, Ken and his administration to move forward and pay for the things that we our value. And, we just sat through a curriculum meeting tonight where we talked about, I sat in the audience and listened. We have a strong desire on our board to fund and to have counselors available for our students. They had the conversation, I
I
wasn't
was
there.
gonna say, that committee, there was a bunch of us upstairs.
Yeah,
that
no, I
were,
know,
like,
but it was
not-
earlier in that meeting.
Not involved in that, that's the whole thing about our committee
No, I
structure
just
that
sat in
we've
the
been
audience, but,
beating on for years, but.
And the 2 that we're bringing on this year are contracted, and they're contracted with access dollars. If we wanted to keep just those 2 counselors who we hope are going to make a real difference for our students, we're going to have to come up with that money next year to pay them in a different way than, we're going to be able to pay for them in 1920. So
I agree. That we need to think about things going forward. It's not in a 1-year kind of
not a
cycle, and we
1-year.
do need to think about the go forward. So in thinking about the go forward, when the community members whose homes are assessed at the 2000, 2001 level get their first bill, there's going to be a lot of screaming in the streets because, we have to remember that even though these things all look small in these annual increments, the reality is it is stacked up quite heavily over this last X number of years. I'm not pointing fingers. I'm not saying the amounts were right, wrong, or indifferent, but the reality is it's stacked up. And our taxpayers are, if they aren't feeling it today, because our tax assessment's going to be on average, a $250 roughly increase per household, doesn't feel bad. But when they get that reassessment, and their assessment is huge, we're going to hear about it. And if we think that,
But the reassessment can be budget neutral, so how is that possible?
because some
If they
homeowners,
change their assessment?
some homeowners that are quote-unquote overpaying will be adjusted down, and homeowners that were assessed in 2000, 2001 are going to go up, some of them probably fairly substantially. And that's even if, assuming they
That's
didn't
not
make.
our fault. I see what you're saying.
I got you. I don't think it's our fault either, but that's a hard, cold reality, and I think we need to think about that. It's a hardship. It's, even these little increments each year, it adds up. It adds up fast for some people especially.
And I think we'll expect to be busy that year with tax assessment appeals.
Uh,
I
for
think that we
sure.
will be very busy that
This
year.
mic should clear as can.
All righty, well, I don't know if, if there's any further comment, or if it's just time to take a vote.
We can call the vote.
Okay, great. So all those in favor of passing the budget as motioned and second, you can raise your hands or say aye. 1, 2, 3.
Aye.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Andrew, Sarah,
Andrew said aye.
and Sarah? Okay, so the motion passes 7-2. Thank you.
Actually, I didn't vote.
Yeah, I was
Oh,
gonna
I'm
say
sorry,
you
all
didn't
those
actually
opposed,
call.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Motion passes 7-2. Thank you. All righty, so we're going to move on to our next item, which is, I don't think I'm in the right, yeah, I am in the right budget. In the consent agenda, it's written as a consent agenda item. Although board action is required, it is generally unnecessary to hold discussion on these items. With the consent of all board members, they are therefore grouped, and approval is given in one motion. In the event a board member wants to discuss any item, the board president will move it to an appropriate place on the agenda. So, are there any items that people would like to pull from the consent agenda?
6.2?
6.2, anything else? All
I
righty,
have a quick question on 6.3,
on 6.2? Sarah?
sorry.
Okay, I'll pull 6.3 and
I
let,
have a quick question on 6.3.
that's fine, we'll pull it and not let you ask your quick question. So I'll entertain a motion to approve items 5 through, looks like 6 point, no, just 5.
Just 6.1.
Just 6.1. All those in favor? All those
Oh,
opposed?
sorry, I was okay with it.
Okay, motion passes 9-0. Patty, you pulled 6.2.
I did, because I'm going to come back to the earlier discussion that we had today, that we do project that we'll have a $1.5 or so million surplus, and while I realize that won't be certified until the October timeframe, given the other fund balances that we talked about earlier in 15 in the curriculum committee, I'm quite confident that $1.5 million will be, you'll still need to transfer some funds come October when it's certified, is my guess. So I am going to, I'd like to make a motion that the board approves the transfer of $1 million from the general fund to the capital reserve fund prior to the June 30th, 2019, designating that $1 million to the bleacher replacement project.
Okay, do we have you have a motion. Do you have a second? Okay, second. I don't know if there's any board discussion, if you'd like to hear from Michelle on the impact of this.
That's exactly what was going to be my question. What are the pros and cons of doing such a thing?
All right. It's hard to see whether you're on or not. So you can definitely transfer it earmarked for the bleacher replacement project. The issue with that is it has to be spent within a certain period of time, and if it's not spent within a certain amount of time, it has to be reallocated to a different project. Because you are doing a board resolution that specifically earmarks it for that specific project, you will have to do another motion if you can't spend it within the 3 years. I believe it is. I'll have to double check that for certain. You would have to do another motion at that time. It would not be my suggestion that you would assign it to a specific project. We can move it into the bleacher project, and then when we get ready to do transfers and things like that around when we're working on the capital plan, we can have further discussion. I think that meets exactly what you're trying to accomplish without having to have 2 votes if you can't spend the funds.
So Michelle, because you might have misspoken, was it your recommendation that we just move it to the capital reserve fund without earmarking it?
Correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to
So
clarify what you
there are
were saying.
projects that are earmarked, but those projects, as you know, sometimes they materialize, sometimes they don't. And so what we do is, as we go through the capital plan and we start to look at what we're going to be doing, we might decide that, okay, we're not going to do this project, and so we're going to take those funds and we're going to specifically earmark them for something else. But if you specifically earmark it for something, you then are you're committed to doing that within a specific time frame.
See,
And
I
for me,
heard it
that's
as a-
actually an added bonus,
I-
because we've been talking about this bleacher situation. It is absolutely a requirement that we get it done. It's unacceptable to me that we allow it to linger on, and the concept that we would do 3 whole years, if that's the number, even if it's 2 years, quite frankly. We know we're gonna end up spending $1 million on that project. Even when I say the bleacher project, I mean specifically the bleachers, whether it's at Enki or at the other field, Prevost. I don't really care, but I'm not talking about the whole big project and a new big building and a new this or a new that. I'm talking about bleacher replacement. We have played around with this entirely too long. And to think that we can't use that money in a 3-year time frame to replace our bleachers, to deal with the safety and the access issues of the people who have come before us multiple times, is, that's an added bonus. I did not realize that
See,
that was a
I heard that as
limitation. I say yay.
I heard Patty's request as a two-part thing. One was the earmarking, but the other was increasing the current 500,000 allocation to $1 million. And so I guess, unless I misheard, I'd be interested, I think, Michelle, you addressed the earmarking aspect of the suggestion, but not the increase from 500 to $1 million. So perhaps, did I hear that wrong, or no? Okay.
That's good.
So I just, if you could give us the pros and cons of that aspect of the request, that would be helpful.
Well, currently, I don't see any cons to transferring more money over to the capital fund. You know that you're going to have projects, you've got a lot of projects that are identified even years past 1920. And we do have an anticipated surplus that is over and above that $1 million that's being requested to be transferred. So, in my opinion, without earmarking it to something specific, I don't see a downfall to doing that.
And what's the downfall of doing 500,000 now and waiting to do some later?
You could do that as well.
But I mean, maybe the word downfall is one word for it, but a rationale was for 500 initially, the $1 million, why did you suggest 500,000 as opposed to $1 million? I thought I heard it had something to do with the lack of debt official surplus.
So the reason the $500,000 was suggested was based on conversations we had at our board meeting the special meeting we had last month, to use option B, and that would, when we presented option B, we were talking about using the committed fund balance, and we've since changed that to unassigned fund balance. So that's why the 500 was suggested, because that's how we got to balance the budget. But transferring an additional 500,000, as Ken said, you can do that at any time if you're going to take it out of unassigned or assigned fund balance. You just can't take it out of 1920 or 1819's surplus until the audit is finalized.
So to just follow that thought then, if raising it from 500 to $1 million was, the intention behind that, Patty, was to have it earmarked for bleacher, and you're recommending against earmarking it for bleacher, for lack of a better word, I guess the question is, should it still go up to $1 million, or should it go back to the original proposal, in your opinion?
I don't see that there's a downside. What I see it as a downside is identifying it specific for one purpose, which is bleachers. It's different if you have a project that's identified, like when we were looking at doing the additions on Ithan and Wayne, we had those specifically identified, so we transferred money over specifically for that. That's a little bit different. Right now, we don't have a project that's been identified yet.
So the last month of facilities, Michelle, we had PFM here, and we talked about what it would look like, because we all want to see this project move as fast as we can. And we talked about the next steps after the feasibility study of obtaining the architects. We had the discussions about whether or not we would want to float a bond. How does that, is there anything we want to think about with that piece of this as before we move forward and adjust those dollars?
I don't think that there is anything you need to think about. Certainly, if we decide to do a bond, we would have those dollars that have been set aside for the bleacher project in the capital account that we could reassign to something else, because that project would not be completed.
Yeah, that was a bad beginning of a sentence. We could not use the capital fund to pay the debt service on the capital project.
You
Can we?
You cannot use the capital fund to pay for the debt service.
Right, on the bleacher
But-
project anyway.
but what you can-
But if we took the $1 million into the capital project, that would free up money out of the general budget to pay the debt service on the project, and we could finally get some of these other projects that have been lingering and pushed off for so many years done.
So it doesn't really do that. It doesn't really free up the money, because you budget for your debt service in your 500 object
Right.
account, so you're still going to have to budget for it in your general fund.
Right, but
But there's some options that you can do that we talked about last month with PFM when they were here. If you do a bond issue, you can pass a resolution that allows you to pay yourself back if you have project costs that are incurred. So you can actually start on the project,
Right.
and you can do your bond funding at a later date in time, and then pay yourself back for those dollars that you've spent.
Michelle, if you do have that money set aside, is there any reason why you could not use that money to pay for part of the project? Or why would you have to put a bond out for the entire project?
You
Or-
wouldn't have to. You could use
Yeah.
it in
Right, a
combination.
combination of the two, if you wanted to.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah, you
that's all.
absolutely could.
So I think where Patty's trying to go with this is, you know, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think I've heard you loud and clear over the last few years, you know, Patty's proposal, which I don't hear Michelle being opposed to, is moving over $1 million. I think where Michelle and Patty differ is that Patty would like to see it committed to the bleacher project. Michelle's recommendation is we not do that. You know, we have a standing motion on the table, on the floor, and we can vote on that, and see how it goes, and then proceed with the conversation or the discussion, or do you want to offer a friendly amendment, Patty, where we do commit the $1 million, you know, to the capital reserve? It's not earmarked for the bleachers, but I will tell you, we hear you loud and clear, and Mike is working very hard as chair of facilities to keep this project moving. We're having a meeting, a facilities meeting in July, which is not typical, because we want to keep this project moving forward. There is a strong commitment to get things done.
The philosophical difference here is we have grown the project from fixing the bleachers to doing a whole bunch of other stuff, whether we need it or don't need it. Will take a good long time for us to vet out, work our way through all the finances, work our way through the substantial, you know, the support from the community. It will drag the project on. I did not realize that we had a 3-year, you know, that it imposed a 3-year limit. That actually makes me even more anxious to want to designate the $1 million to the bleachers.
I do have to
replacement.
check on that. My recollection is it's
That's
three.
in that
it's-
range.
It's in that
Yeah,
range.
it's fine. I mean, whether it's 2 years, 3 years, doesn't really matter to me. That project has dragged on too long, and I want to see it get done and deal with the issues that we know are there, and stop trying to sugarcoat and give us all sorts of, you know, gold-plated things that we want at the facility. Deal with those separately.
I'd like to call the question.
Okay.
Can I ask another question? So I just want to understand, when you said that, that we'd have to reallocate, I'm sorry, did I misunderstand?
He wanted to call the vote.
It's just
He
the
wants me to
Robert's-
call the vote.
Robert's Rule of Order, we have to vote on calling the question
Yeah,
before you
we
can
do.
ask.
Yeah,
But-
so-
But
No, hang on. So we've had a motion to call the question. All those in favor?
Well, Julia has a
All those
question. I'll wait.
opposed?
I'll wait. till Julia-
Okay.
What
No,
are we
no.
voting on?
Hey, thank you.
If you
Julia,
vote-
no, guys, I'll explain it. I'll
Yeah,
explain
if
it.
you
I'll
vote no,
explain it. We
Julia
shot
can-
it down.
Correct.
Julia can ask her question. It's fine. We shot down calling the question so that Julia could ask her question. Now we're procedurally correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Michelle, so you were saying that if we went ahead and we earmarked the funds for the bleachers replacements within 3 years, and if in 3 years from now we still didn't have bleachers done, and by the way, if that happened, then everyone should resign right now.
Yeah.
But let's just say 3 years from now, we don't have it done yet, we're still sitting on the same bleachers 3 years from now, and we have to move the funds somewhere else,
We can vote.
what's the big deal?
The big deal is, depending on what you do with the bleachers, what needs to be done at that site, in my opinion, includes more than just replacing the bleachers. There are site issues that make it very difficult for people who have a walker, are in a wheelchair, the band, moving.
Michelle, I
those-
think she's asking a different question. I think she's asking, if we haven't done that procedurally to be able to free up that money, we'd have to take another board vote.
We'd have to take
I
another
think that's the
board
question she's
vote.
asking.
And it sounds like a procedural, no big deal. Am I misunderstanding what it would mean then to push it somewhere else 3 years from now?
I don't think that you're misunderstanding what it would mean. Depending on how much would be there, I believe there'd be $1.8 million there if we move this $1 million. So you'd have to have $1.8 million worth of projects identified that you could reallocate those funds to.
Because once it's in capital, it has to stay in capital. That's the one fund we can't ping pong around.
Correct.
But the reality is, if you look at our five-year capital plan, spending $1.8 million is no problem. Pick
right.
a project. It
So-
doesn't really matter. We could just say, put it back out of undesignated, but leave it in the capital.
All right, so I'd like to call the question. Oh, I would like to call the question. So all those in favor of,
Define what you're calling.
all those in favor, Patty has a motion on the floor that we amend this to say administration, moving $1 million from the 2018-19 general fund to the capital reserve fund prior to June 30th, 2019, earmarked for the Radnor High School bleacher project. All those in. Bleacher
I want to be
replacement.
really painfully clear. Bleacher replacement, because I don't want somebody to think that means all of this other stuff. It is bleacher replacement.
I get that. So all those in.
But that's not what the project's called, and
That's my
it's
point,
that,
right?
well, that,
Yeah, I
that's
get
the
it.
thing,
So-
that's like saying,
so-
I mean,
So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And all those opposed?
Wait, I'm sorry. What are you asking a
No.
vote for? What are you asking a vote for? For my motion?
Your motion.
Oh, my motion is an aye.
You're an aye. So 3 ayes. And all those opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4,
No.
5, 6. The motion fails, 3 to 6. So now we're back to our transfer. I'd like to make a friendly amendment, or to entertain a friendly amendment to transfer the $1 million to the capital reserve fund uncommitted, with the understanding that we are moving forward on our Radnor High School infrastructure project.
So I'll make that motion to move the dollars, I don't have my thing open, to move
Okay.
move
$1
$1 million
million
from general fund 10 to the
Capital
capital
reserve.
fund without a designation.
Great. A second?
second,
We have a second from Chuck. All those in favor?
aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Sarah and Andrew?
So
I'm voting against it because I like to go with one.
Okay.
I
And
just
Chuck,
prefer to stick with the recommendation from.
great. And Andrew?
this is on the consent agenda.
Yes, but as $1 million instead of 100, instead of 500,000.
Right, and I also voted against it, too.
So right now we have 6-4, we have 2 against, I'm waiting for Andrew's vote.
No, because
Okay.
I don't see the case, so.
Great, so the motion passes 6-3. Lydia, Sarah, and Andrew are opposed. Sarah, you had a question about 6.3. There was,
I just had a quick question. There's
Sure.
a fee that's gonna get charged to users on the My School Bus, the transaction fee.
yes.
And my question was whether, for technology, is that going to be applied whether or not they pay by credit card, or can people avoid that fee, can parents avoid that fee by paying by check?
So parents can pay by either check or cash, and they would not incur the fee. This is a credit card service that Joan Casano had asked us to look into years ago when she was still here, and Byron McCook asked us to look into again because of the implementation of this Surface Goes. It's the same thing that we do with our food service people. If they choose to pay by credit card, we pass the fee on to them, but they can always pay with cash or check without an additional fee.
Okay, so Sarah, now that you had your question answered, would you like to move to,
Yeah, I'm just sensitive to the fact that we're asking parents to pay this extra money and then we would be tacking on a fee. So as long as we're clear with them in the communications that they can pay a different way and not incur the fee, then I'm fine with it.
okay, so you want to move it for approval? 6.3?
Yes.
And I need a second?
Second.
6.3.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 9-0. Okay, great, thank you. Do we have any new business? Okay, seeing none, our board announcements, our next business meeting will be next Tuesday, June 25th at 7 PM in the Radnorshire Room in Radnor Township, in the Radnor Township Building. And seeing no members in the audience, I'm going to say that we have no more public comment. Patty, are there any emails? Okay, alrighty, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. And a second?
Second.
Great, all those in favor? All those in favor?
Aye.
Great. Motion passes 9-0. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.